cops at the university.
Yep.
So then they would chase us, and then I'd work on my sprints.
That's classic.
Leave them from them. But I would actually just like find them and then ride around next to them until they would chase us.
Today on Mountain Bikers in Trucks Getting Burritos, we have Kyle Strait.
Oh,
Pretty much what it is.
this is where your old house was, right?
Right back there.
Right over there. Yeah.
When was the first time you ever came to Reno? 17?
I want to say it was when I started driving, so 17 probably.
The car we were driving on today's episode is a rental truck. We got an e-hybrid Ram, and they gave me two-wheel drive. So that's what we're dealing with. These things somehow made it up. Water tank in the back and all. Up the steep road. Still got a hand on the wheel. I feel like as you get older and different style of riding, your motivations are just completely different, you know? So starting from the beginning, and eventually we'll get to when we're on the big Oakley team and we're filming for the biggest movie in the world. What was your initial drive to ride? Like what made you want to ride bikes so much and excel at it, put time into it at the beginning?
You know, honestly, like once you get into riding, right? Like, just, I guess you got into it a little bit different, like mostly because of Howie, right?
Yeah, it was from Kuka Components. It was mostly my dad, but then Howie was really good at it. So
Yeah. So you had like someone that was also riding. I think I just rode a bike like every other kid, but then my dad kind of pushed me into like, hey, there's this race, you want to try this? And I'm like, I don't know. And then it became this thing where I wanted to ride as many different things as I could and ride all the time, like as much as I could. And I couldn't always like, you know, go to a downhill race or whatever, and it's before we could always drive. So I would ride dirt jumps, you know, take the bus, or like my family was pretty like chaotic, I guess.
chaotic with a CH.
Yeah, an actual chaotic, right? So like I think that was my getaway from like the chaos of my family. And so I think I just used that as like a vice to get away from everything and focus on something else. And then
I think it'd be more of a virtue than a vice, but like
Virtue?
Yeah, I've actually never heard you go into detail that much about it, because that was honestly mine as well, and I found out through like couples therapy and things. They're like, well, this is why you did this when you're, and I'm like, I totally did. I was riding my bike and getting away because like house was chaotic sometimes.
well, you don't realize until you're older too, right?
Yeah.
Until like these ages where you're like, oh, that's why I just wanted to get away from all this.
Yeah.
And it worked out great, obviously.
Did you ride out a lot of street?
Cheers.
Cheers.
Worked out pretty good.
Seems to be working out.
You know what I actually did? I used to ride a ton of street because I grew up right next to the University of Redlands, and you know I'd ride my 20 pegs and stuff, and because that was just like 2 blocks away from me, so I did ride street, but it was only to ride, you know, so I could ride.
Yeah.
But then that turned into like find the security guard cops at the university.
Yeah.
So then they would chase us, and then I'd work on my sprints.
That's classic.
Leave them from them. But I would actually just like find them and then ride around next to them until they would chase us.
That's pretty sweet. Yeah, I rode a ton of street growing up for the same reason, that it was the most accessible. You know, leave from the house. And the good dirt jumps were way across town. Wasn't really supposed to go there on my own when I was younger. And then the ones that were closer were, you know, I kind of moved past those and tried to dig some bigger ones, and then it just was one-man dig team kind of. So yeah, street riding was kind of just the easiest route to be on my bike. But honestly, Kondrashoff and I were talking about it the other day, how like riding street is really good for downhill, because everything's so much more precise, and
Yeah.
there's no suspension, and you work on being smoother on hard landings. And because Howie was one of the better Junior X racers in his era, of like Ryan White and some of these, you know, really prolific juniors. They're like factory, chasing cotting, and he was super fast, but he would never ride downhill, and he wouldn't even ride street that much, but he was just naturally talented. But the only things that he really would ride in between races was street, and it's kind of crazy how it translates when it's almost the antithesis, or like completely opposite ends of the spectrum of bike ride.
It's crazy how many things actually do help for downhill.
Yeah.
You know, like street's a huge one, even like dirt jump and pump track, trail bike ride, and like, you know, besides your typical like, oh, I need to go train and be fit and just ride downhill. Like there's so many other things you can add to your skill set that you can use racing downhill, or I mean even into Rampage or whatever it may be. Like
I think that's the main reason. Like if there was one thing that kept like we have two of the longest careers ever in freeride, you know, and I think two of us have we've competed in more Rampages than anyone else. You're like every single one, and I'm all but the first two. But I think the biggest thing, integral piece of the puzzle of having that longevity is just the diversity and being able to keep it fun and always having something different to ride to not get burnt out.
Yeah.
Because motocross riders train so hard and they have to do X, Y, and Z, and they have to do it all day, every day, weight training this day. And World Cup downhill is kind of like that as well, but or
even slope like these days.
Yeah,
right?
if you want to compete in slopestyle at the highest level, you can't ride too much else.
Yeah.
Or focus on.
You don't have time
else.
for it, or you're like there's no reason to.
Yeah, and you'd be like recovering from all the hits you're taking to even bother riding anything else. But I think we grew up in a really cool time to be able to help shape the sport, but then also to bounce around and do everything. Like we're both flying to Europe, bringing a bike for a 4-cross World Cup, bringing a downhill World Cup, and then bringing like your jump bike, your slope bike to go to Adidas slopestyle or something. So gone for like a month in Europe and travel around with 3 or 4 bike bags and double duty in it. And I mean, you did way better in World Cups than I, but it's still, I don't know, it's an achievement to just even be able to compete at those levels in that many areas of the sport.
Well, there's
at one
like,
time.
It's kind of odd too. Like a lot of people didn't know or don't really think about it, right? Like the only support most of us would get at the time was if you were racing.
Yep.
Right? And like there wasn't such thing as a dude like, oh, like you can make a career out of filming.
Unless you're a pro rider.
Yeah, but those guys didn't really go anywhere.
No, I know. I'm just saying that like, there was like the Marzocchi team, and there was like a couple things that were just like they made it quick and big. But yeah, there weren't too many outlets or paying sponsors, and
but you basically had to be on those same products as just those dudes.
Yeah,
like there were only those companies that were doing that, and you had to be on like for factory support, frames and stuff like that, and you had to be racing as well.
Yeah,
like it wasn't like, I don't know the right word. It would be like
my first contract with Santa Cruz was like, they didn't even know how to word it. It was just half and half. You're a free rider and a racer. Yeah. We're going to do mandated to do these races, you know, Craig Works and this World Cup and this
team,
you know,
and stuff.
And then the subsequent 2 or 3 years on Haro, and that was the same kind of deal. Like I was on my own program and I had support from like SRAM and Rock Shocks at some of the races, but I was just on like kind of my own little Haro program. But I've loved how it developed us as, you know, just as riders in the style and how we focus. Like you're exactly like me in not having that many tricks, and because you don't want to do them all the time, you'd rather focus on bike control and actual but it's really cool what's happening in moto with some of the most prolific and biggest names in freestyle moto and motocross period are just really talented dudes, not from the tricks, you know, like Axel and Berriman and Colby. Like they don't have Adam Jones's tricks, like not even close, but it's more bike control and whip based and going fast and doing creative lines.
Well, you look at dudes like Berriman, right? Like that dude can ride anything. You put him on a supercross track, you put him in the dunes, you put him like trail riding, you put him motocross track, you know, freestyle ramps. You can just ride it all.
Yep.
You know, he has a skill set, or all of those skill sets to be able to just be like one of the best dudes at all of them.
Yeah. And I greatly appreciate it because that's kind of how we've cultivated our careers and riding style. But it's cool to see the general public appreciate it, and they have a home with X Games quarter and whip and all that, and then videos, but then social media, and you don't have to be doing double combo, double flips anymore to be a big name.
It's wild that it was kind of us as athlete riders at the time, you know, young riders, that we wanted to just ride all sorts of different sorts of stuff, but then it actually was like worked out better for us to be able to do that. And then still to this day that we're like comfortable riding all different types of bikes or terrain or whatever.
Yeah,
so
and
it was like,
and kind of hitting back to what I was saying earlier, that I think I would have got burnt out if I was just a BMX rider or just a racer. Like,
I still get burned out. I'm like, slalom season, I'm over that.
Yeah.
All right, it's rampage season.
Yeah.
You know, or whatever it may be. And then I switch it around. Okay, now we're ready for off season. Now we're ready for digging season. You know, and like,
that's what's so cool.
I think that's kept me going, is like through all these years as riding, is like, all right, it's all broken up into different things. I mean, like, granted, every September, I but I like stop riding all my other bikes, and I only ride my Rampage bike.
Yep.
And then until Rampage is done, I only ride that bike, and I don't like schedule any photo shoots, or I don't schedule any other trips that are not on downhill bikes.
Yeah.
Or on my Rampage bike. So it's like very hyper focused in that one bike, and then it's like, okay, next bike. And then I won't ride it until like sometimes June next year, like the following year, from October to June.
Yeah,
and then I'm focused on a different bike.
If there was one bike I spend the most time on, it's definitely a downhill bike, but I've always done that as well. And it used to be after Crankworks, train really hard for Crankworks.
Yeah.
You know, slopestyle season is like the focal point, and then as soon as that was up, but then when Claw had his event, it'd be after that. But after the last slope event was done, same thing.
Yeah, just solely focus on the downhill.
Put it in the corner of the garage, don't touch it, and I would always even bring my downhill bike even to the local dirt jumps that are not meant for a downhill bike, just in case you had a weird line out there and you needed to freshen up on hitting like a more spiny jump into pump.
Or just like pumping speed, right? Because you're already at disadvantage being on the downhill bike.
Yeah.
Like, oh, how do I gain more speed?
Yeah.
And that can translate anywhere out there or wherever. But I mean, I think that idea of like being hyper focused on a certain bike, it like, you use all your energy and your focus on that, and then you switch it up, and it's actually like a totally different mindset.
And it does matter too, like bike setup and like you being comfortable with it. Like, even though it's really easy to blame yourself if something's not going right. Like,
did you see this car pop up yesterday? Oh, it's gone again.
Yeah, there was one just like, and I was like, there's no road over there.
Bushes. How did it get over there? Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, what was I saying?
Being hyper focused on a bike.
Yeah, so I mean, if my bike wasn't set up right, and it was, you know, usually you can just tell even by bouncing around right around the parking lot. But if there was something weird about it, I would usually just blame myself. You know, it's not the bike, but then you get these moments to when you change some settings or you get a new shock, or you're like, oh, that's what was messing up. Because it still has, you know, 10 to 25% the machine, you know, and then, you know, 70 plus rider, like, whereas moto would be, they'd say it's more 50-50, and then like F1 cars are like the opposite, you know, like 75-20 for the rider, or for the cars is most important. But for bikes, it's most the rider, but the bike still matters, you know. And, so to be able to fine tune, be able to fine tune your downhill bike to know exactly what it's going to do is imperative for, you know, blind takeoffs at 60 feet, you know.
And even knowing, even if it's not the best setup, or you have your bike more set up for X or whatever, like you wouldn't be able to ride my bike, I wouldn't be able to ride your bike, but we know that feeling, that bike, how that bike reacts.
Yep.
And it's like I can hop on and just go do whatever.
Yeah.
Where like if I had a different setup, even though if maybe that setup might be better, could be, but I know exactly every time with that setup I can just go out and go ride it.
That's why I never understood why the moto riders are always testing and always changing stuff, and like if you find something,
it's not consistent.
Then it reacts different. So I mean, even riding from downhill like trails to big jumps, I try to keep my settings really close to each other. But now it's really sweet with the push shock. You can have the 2 tunes and flip the flip lever.
I mostly I usually just lose pressure. That's all. But all the settings are the same.
Yeah, I found that if I don't have the dual compressions and settings, then just dropping the low speed is most important for me. And it just sags it out, makes everything else better. But I mean, I don't know. Some racers run their stuff so stiff. I think Gwynn's bike, when he was on YT and I was, sat on his, and I think it was stiffer than my Rampage bike.
Was it?
Yeah, it's pretty
But
wild.
then there's riders like G, where you get on his bike and it's insanely soft.
Yeah, way too soft.
And that's how he liked it. And you're like, whoa, dude.
Yeah, I guess if it's predictable, that's the most important.
And yeah, that's what
because it's obviously not going to be that controlled or stable at a G out with bumps as like Gwynn's bike would, but maybe it's floating over the top rocks better and the flat corners a little bit better. Yeah, I think no matter what, it's like it has to be your bike, like how you know it's going to react.
How do you feel about your game cams? Are they connected to anything, or they just?
Dude, they're awesome. Those game cameras are cell tower. They don't need Wi-Fi.
Oh, so you're saying it wouldn't work at my house?
Just got a notification on my phone right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it'll say someone, and I got one on the shop, so catch license plates and catch faces of people that might be stealing something.
I'm loving that you finally have a shop. Much needed and awesome.
Yeah, baking in the sun out here all day, waiting for the light to be better.
Or wind or whatever.
Yeah, I've come a long way from digging in the schoolyard on someone else's property and getting kicked out.
Or just your stuff getting plowed. You know, you have your jumps in the random field and you come out there and you're excited to ride and then it's gone.
Yep.
So like having property is the most insane. It's sick that we both have our own spots now.
Yeah.
Just to be able to go ride or train or film or practice or test things or whatever.
Yeah, that's my goal now, having kids, never leave. So I can just stay in town, film, build whatever I want, and get to hang out with my kids every day. So I guess we'll end it on that. We're living the dream.
More for next time.
Just living the dream. Getting your own land and getting to do what you want. Same thing you did as a kid for as long as possible. That's the goal.
Till you can't. Then I'll make somebody drag me around.